A man can lose money. He can lose fame. He can lose the room. But Halston lost something stranger. He lost his name. Roy Halston Frowick, the man the world knew simply as Halston, dressed first ladies, wrapped movie stars in liquid fabric, ruled Studio 54 like a high priest of American glamour, and then somehow ended up legally separated from the very word that made him famous, Halston. Imagine building an empire, signing your name across an entire era, and then being told you can no longer use it, not on a dress, not on a label, not even, supposedly, on a napkin. Is that story true? Mostly. And the details are even colder than the rumor, because Halston was not just a designer who rose too fast and fell too hard. He was a man who turned himself into an atmosphere, a silhouette, a kind of spell. Then the spell was sold out from under him. So today, we're following the thread from a boy in Iowa to the most glamorous room in New York, and finally to the strange afterlife of a brand without its creator. By the end, the ghost in the sunglasses may look a little less unknowable. This is the story of Halston. Roy Halston Frowick was born in Des Moines, Iowa in 1932. Not Paris, not Manhattan, not some marble-floored house of couture. Iowa, the middle of the Great Depression, in a part of America so far from a runway you can almost hear the cornfields before you see the clothes. His father was an accountant. The family moved around the Midwest constantly. There was no fashion scene waiting for young Roy, no grand salon, no elegant mentor waving him toward destiny. What he had was smaller, quieter. A grandmother who taught him to sew. A mother he adored. And, as a boy, the habit of making hats for her. That detail has a pulse. Because while other children were scribbling in school books or kicking dust in the yard, Roy was shaping felt, pinning fabric, learning with his hands before he had the language for what he was becoming. And the hat mattered. Small object, enormous doorway. That overlooked little crown would become his ticket out of the Midwest entirely. But first he needed a city with money, women, taste, and appetite. He needed Chicago, and Chicago, as it turned out, was only the first test. In Chicago, Roy enrolled briefly at the Art Institute, but school was never really his natural kingdom. The shop floor was. That was where he learned the useful things, how fabric behaves, how rich women talk, how desire moves through a room, how a beautiful object becomes a social weapon. He set himself up as a milliner, a hat maker, and very quickly discovered that he had two gifts. One was making elegant things, the other was making the right people notice them. That second gift is not decoration. It is survival. He sold hats out of a hotel. He charmed the wealthy women of Chicago society. One commission became two. Two became a reputation. And in that era, when no respectable woman left the house without a hat, timing was on his side. For once. But Halston was not built for the edge of the map. Chicago gave him customers, polish, practice. It did not give him the center of gravity. And he wanted the center. In American fashion in the 1950s, that meant one city, New York. So he packed up his hats and made the old dangerous bargain. Leave the place where you are becoming known for the place where nobody cares yet. A brutal trade, a necessary one. What he could not know was that his New York breakthrough would arrive perched on someone else's head. In New York, Halston landed at Bergdorf Goodman, the temple of American luxury retail, running the custom hat salon. Now, this is where the myth starts to sharpen. He was not yet Halston the Empire. Not yet the man with the entourage, the orchids, the sunglasses, the room full of celebrities. He was the man behind the hat. Quietly, precisely, he was making headwear for the richest and most photographed women in the country. And while he did it, he studied the machinery from the inside. How status is built, how taste is certified, how a woman of power wants to appear when every camera in America is waiting. Then came 1961. A young senator's wife walked into her husband's inauguration wearing one of his designs, a simple, clean pillbox hat. The woman was Jacqueline Kennedy. The hat became one of the most copied accessories in American history. Just like that, Halston's name was now attached to the most glamorous woman in the country, at the most watched political ceremony in America, at the exact moment style and television were fusing into one bright new force. Most designers would have dined out on that hat for years, maybe forever, Halston did something more dangerous. He looked at the very object that had made him famous and understood that it was dying. Women were changing, hair was changing, manners were changing. The hat, once mandatory, was becoming optional, then unnecessary. So instead of clinging to the ladder that had lifted him, he kicked it away. And that could have ended everything. Halston walked away from hats. By the late 1960s, he did the terrifying thing. He left the security of Bergdorf Goodman and in 1968 opened his own label to make clothes. Clothes, a field where he had no track record at all. There is a special kind of nerve in that move, not the loud kind, the private kind, the kind that says, I would rather risk being nothing than keep being applauded for the thing I have already outgrown. And when the clothes appeared, they did not behave like the clothes around them. The 60s had loved structure, fuss, loud prints, stiff little ceremonies of fabric. Halston stripped the room clean. Clean lines, fluid fabrics, no clutter, no begging for attention. He took Ultrasuede, a synthetic material almost nobody treated as serious, and turned it into a shirt dress that sold in the hundreds of thousands. Seriously, he helped popularize a way of cutting on the bias so a dress seemed to pour over the body rather than sit on top of it. His clothes did not cage a woman into elegance. They let elegance move. That was the revolution. He was inventing the relaxed, sensual American look we now take for granted, the kind of chic that pretends it took no effort, while secretly requiring ruthless discipline. Critics noticed, customers noticed, the industry noticed. But a designer does not become a legend by making beautiful garments alone. A legend needs a stage. And Halston found his after midnight. By the mid-1970s, Halston was not merely designing the era. He was living at its molten center. His clothes draped the most famous bodies alive: Liza Minnelli, Bianca Jagger, Elizabeth Taylor, Angelica Houston. Around him gathered a rotating court of muses known as the Halstonettes, women who wore him like a passport into the new glamour. And everywhere, at that moment, meant Studio 54, the nightclub, the fever dream, the velvet rope cathedral of celebrity, excess, flashbulbs, and beautiful bad decisions. Halston was there constantly, not hovering at the edge of fame but seated at its altar. The cameras were pointed at the people he dressed. The people he dressed were standing beside him. The room and the clothes began to sell each other. That was his genius. Halston understood something many designers only pretend to understand. The image was the product, not just the dress, the life around the dress, the ease, the smoke, the orchid on the table, the famous woman laughing as if consequences were for other people. The sense that glamour did not have to arrive armored and stiff. It could glide in, bare-shouldered, and own the room. For a few dazzling years, Halston was not selling clothes. He was selling the fantasy of being untouchably cool, and America bought it. Of course it did. But when a man becomes a brand, every deal starts to look like destiny. The next one looked brilliant on paper, visionary even. It was also the trapdoor. In the 1970s, Halston reached for something luxury fashion barely knew how to imagine. He wanted to dress everybody, not just the elite, not just the women who floated through Bergdorf, Studio 54, or private rooms where the flowers cost more than rent. Everybody. In 1973, he had already helped make history at the Battle of Versailles, where American designers stunned the French establishment on their own turf. That victory mattered. It announced that American fashion was no longer the provincial cousin at the table. Now Halston wanted scale, so he signed licensing deals. Then, in 1983, came the massive JCPenney deal, a Middle America department store, an affordable line, ordinary shoppers getting access to the Halston look. From where we sit now, that sounds almost obvious. Designer meets mass retail. The collaboration drops. Everyone lines up. But in 1983, the luxury world recoiled. Bergdorf Goodman, the store that had helped make him, dropped his high-end line in response. The message was brutal and clear. If Halston belonged to everyone, then maybe he no longer belonged in the temple. And then comes the part that still feels almost medieval. because in these deals, Halston had sold the rights to his own trademark. The name Halston no longer belonged to Roy Halston Frowick. So, yes, the rumor from the beginning is essentially true. The man became legally separated from his own name. He could not design under it. He could not simply reclaim it by force of talent or history or moral logic. He had traded the most valuable thing he owned, and the paperwork did not care that it was also his identity. That is where the story turns. The rise is over. Now comes the fall. The company changed hands. It was swallowed into a conglomerate, and Halston, the founder, the visionary, the man whose taste had built the whole machine, found himself locked out of his own studio, forbidden from creating under the label that carried his name. Imagine building a cathedral, carving your initials into every stone, and then being told you are trespassing. That is not just business. That is exile. The world that crowned him also took its payment. The Studio 54 years had glittered, but glitter has weight. The late nights, the excess, the constant performance of being Halston did not come free. His creative output slowed. The deals unraveled. The spotlight that once seemed to obey him moved on, as spotlights always do. And the man who had been the beating heart of American glamour receded, quietly, painfully. In 1990, Halston died of AIDS-related complications. He was 57. There is no elegant way to soften that, nor should there be. A gifted man, a self-made man, a man who taught America a new kind of ease, spent his final years watching strangers control the name he had turned into gold. If the story stopped there, it would be a clean cautionary tale. Fame, money, excess, contracts, the usual cruel little sermon. But Halston refuses to stay that simple, because influence has a way of escaping the grave. And his went everywhere. Here's the strange thing about Halston. Even if you had never heard his name before today, you have seen his ideas. That minimalist, body-skimming American elegance, the clean line, the fluid dress, the refusal to make glamour feel labored. That became a language. Tom Ford has openly cited him. Calvin Klein, Donna Karan, the whole clean-lined American school that dominated the 90s and beyond, all of them are working in a vocabulary Halston helped write. Not copying him. That would be too small. Speaking after him. There is a human thread, too. A young illustrator worked in Halston's orbit in those years, sketching for the master, absorbing the charge of that studio. That illustrator was Joe Eula, and the room around Halston became the kind of workshop that shapes people whether they know it or not. The world kept circling back. Museum retrospectives, a documentary, a splashy dramatized series that put his face, his voice, his silhouette, or at least the idea of him, back in front of millions. Think about the irony. Halston, the man who lost his name, became more famous in death than many designers ever become in life. But resurrection always asks a price, because if the name survives without the man, what exactly is left inside it? That question has haunted the brand ever since. The Halston label still exists. It just has not had Halston in it since 1990. Over the decades, that orphaned name has been bought, sold, relaunched, polished up, and handed to a parade of new creative directors, each one trying to reanimate a ghost with a mood board and a deadline. Some attempts brought in big names. There was even a much-hyped moment when the company tried pairing the label with a celebrity to reignite the magic, and every time the same problem rises from the floorboards. How do you run a fashion house built around one man's specific irreplaceable sense of cool when that man is gone? Not just gone from the studio, gone from the planet. Halston was not a faceless brand. He was not a hidden artisan whose name could float above changing generations without much disturbance. He was the performance, the atmosphere, the final edit. He was the show. Take him out and you are left with a beautiful name, a powerful memory, and an impossible assignment. Make absence feel alive. That is why the afterlife of Halston feels so uneasy. The clothes can echo him. The marketing can invoke him. The logo can still sit there, elegant as ever. But the voltage was him. Which brings us back to the shape of the whole life. And the shape is devastating. Roy Halston Frowick began with almost nothing. A boy in Iowa, a needle, a grandmother's lessons, a mother he wanted to adorn. From that, he built himself into the single most powerful name in American fashion. He dressed presidents' wives and movie stars. He helped invent the way an entire nation wanted to look. He turned simplicity into seduction and ease into authority. Then he ruled the most glamorous room on earth. For a moment, he seemed impossible to separate from the age itself. And then, with one signature on a licensing deal, he lost the thing no designer should ever surrender. His name. Not metaphorically. Legally. The most stylish man in America exiled from himself. That is the price tag hidden under all that glamour. Not the money, not the scandal, not even the parties. The price was identity. And once you see that, the whole story changes color. So where does that leave Halston now? His name is still out there, stitched into garments, revived in headlines, attached to relaunches whenever someone decides the ghost might be made profitable again. But the man has been gone for more than 30 years, and somehow that absence has made him larger. Every clean, fluid, effortless dress that moves down a modern runway carries a trace of him. Every version of American glamour that chooses ease over ornament, line over noise, body over costume, is speaking with a little Halston in its mouth. They took the signature away from him. They did not take the handwriting. That is the aftertaste of his life. You can strip a man of his name, lock him out of the house he built, and sell the label until the ink fades. But if he truly changed the shape of things, he remains in the cut, the gesture, the way fabric falls when no one says his name at all. Halston vanished. His influence did not, and that may be the final, strange victory. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more deep dives into the people behind the image. And I will see you in the next one.